Case 1. Harold Camping. May 21, 2011, 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Across America, families huddle on rooftops waiting for Jesus Christ to lift them into heaven. Children clutch stuffed animals, confused why mommy and daddy seem so scared. In living rooms below, divorce papers lie scattered next to emptied bank statements and resignation letters. Nothing happens. For months, 89-year-old radio preacher Harold Camping had guaranteed this moment with mathematical precision. Using complex biblical calculations, he declared May 21st would bring the rapture, the moment true Christians would vanish from earth before God's final judgment. His family radio network reached millions worldwide with this certain prophecy. The devastation was immediate and total. Followers had donated over $100 million to spread Camping's message. Robert Fitzpatrick spent $140,000 of his life savings on New York City billboards warning of the coming apocalypse. Adrienne Martinez quit her job to spend final months with family. Marie Exley liquidated her retirement account to fund Camping's global warning campaign. Believers abandoned spouses who wouldn't convert. Parents neglected children's college funds to donate to family radio. Teenage followers dropped out of school since education seemed pointless before Earth's destruction. Some families stopped medical treatments, believing heavenly bodies would replace diseased ones. As 6 p.m. passed without incident, desperate followers clung to hope. Maybe it was midnight? Maybe California time? Camping himself remained silent as his empire of certainty crumbled in real time. By sunrise, May 22nd, reality was undeniable. Harold Camping had destroyed thousands of lives with a lie. The psychological carnage was immediate. Suicide hotlines reported increased calls from devastated Camping followers. Families faced foreclosure after donating everything. Children returned to schools they'd been pulled from, emotionally traumatized by their parents' delusions. Camping pathetically revised his prediction to October 21st, claiming a spiritual judgment had occurred. When that date also failed, he finally admitted his sin of date setting, but the damage was irreversible. But Harold Camping wasn't the first false prophet to destroy lives with failed predictions. Throughout history, charismatic leaders have weaponized humanity's fear of the future, turning desperate faith into devastating betrayal. This is the story of 10 end-times prophets who doomed their followers and got exposed. Welcome to Savage Case Files, where we expose the most shocking true crime cases that mainstream media won't touch. If you're fascinated by stories of betrayal, manipulation, and justice served, you've found your home. Hit that subscribe button right now if you love deep-dive true crime documentaries like this one. We bring you the most disturbing cases of religious fraud, cult manipulation, and prophetic deception that destroyed real lives. Case 2. William Miller. October 22, 1844. Across New England, thousands of believers gather in white robes on hilltops and rooftops, waiting for Jesus Christ to split the sky and take them home. They've sold farms, businesses, and possessions based on one man's mathematical certainty that this date marks the end of human history. William Miller wasn't your typical doomsday preacher. This respected Baptist farmer from New York had spent years meticulously studying biblical prophecy, particularly the Book of Daniel, using complex calculations involving the 2,300-day prophecy. Miller determined that Christ's second coming would occur between March 21, 1843, and March 21, 1844. When that window passed without incident, Miller's followers refused to abandon hope. Samuel Snow, a devoted Millerite, recalculated using the Jewish calendar and pinpointed October 22, 1844, as the true date. Miller himself endorsed this revision, sealing the fate of thousands who trusted his biblical scholarship. The Millerite movement exploded across America. An estimated 100,000 people became convinced believers, with 50,000 preparing for immediate ascension. Farmers left crops unharvested since they wouldn't need them in heaven. Merchants closed shops permanently. Families gave away possessions to spread Miller's urgent warning to unsaved neighbors. Children were pulled from schools deemed unnecessary for heavenly citizens. Wedding plans were canceled since earthly marriages meant nothing in eternity. Some believers stopped eating, expecting their earthly bodies to be transformed momentarily. Others spent final days in constant prayer and biblical study. As October 22nd dawned, excitement reached fever pitch. Believers gathered in churches, homes, and open fields, watching the sky for signs of Christ's return. Hours passed. Sunset approached. Still nothing. As midnight struck October 2030, the devastating truth became undeniable. The psychological devastation was immediate and complete. Believers wandered home in shock, facing foreclosure notices, abandoned businesses, and incredulous neighbors who had watched their religious frenzy with growing alarm. Some suffered complete mental breakdowns. Others abandoned Christianity entirely, feeling betrayed by both Miller and God himself. Miller himself never fully recovered from the failure, though he continued preaching until his death in 1849. His credibility was permanently shattered. The movement fragmented into multiple splinter groups, some eventually forming what became the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Great Disappointment became Christianity's most famous prophetic failure, creating lasting skepticism toward date-setting predictions that continues today. Miller's mathematical certainty had created the template for future false prophets who would weaponize biblical scholarship to manipulate desperate believers. Case 3, David Koresh. April 19, 1993. Mount Carmel compound in Waco, Texas, becomes a blazing inferno as FBI tanks pump tear gas into the wooden buildings. Inside, 76 people die in flames that their leader David Koresh had prophesied would herald the apocalypse. His prediction finally came true, but he was the one who made it happen. Vernon Wayne Howell seemed like an unlikely prophet when he joined the Branch Davidians in 1981. The high school dropout from Houston had struggled with dyslexia and social awkwardness, but within the isolated religious community, his charisma and biblical knowledge elevated him rapidly through the ranks. By 1990, Howell had legally changed his name to David Koresh, combining King David with Cyrus, Koresh in Hebrew, claiming he was the final prophet destined to open the 7 seals described in the book of Revelation. His followers believed he alone could interpret God's will for the end times. Koresh's prophecies weren't just about the future, they justified present control. He claimed God had revealed that only he could father the next generation of God's children, leading to spiritual marriages with followers' wives and daughters, some as young as 12. His divine revelations conveniently aligned with his sexual desires. Koresh preached that the U.S. government would eventually attack Mount Carmel, fulfilling biblical prophecy about the final battle between good and evil. This belief justified massive weapons stockpiling, over 300 firearms, including illegal machine guns and explosive devices that attracted federal attention. On February 28, 1993, ATF agents attempted to serve search and arrest warrants at the compound. The resulting shootout killed 4 agents and 6 Branch Davidians, exactly as Koresh had prophesied. To his followers, this proved his divine insight. The end-times battle had begun. The FBI siege that followed became a psychological battle. Koresh used the standoff to reinforce his apocalyptic narrative, telling followers that their suffering proved they were God's chosen people facing persecution. Each day of siege confirmed his prophecies about government persecution of the faithful. Koresh had long taught that true believers might need to die for their faith. As the siege intensified, he prepared followers for translation death that would transport them directly to heaven. When FBI tanks breached the compound on April 19th, fires erupted simultaneously in multiple locations. Autopsy evidence revealed the shocking reality. Many followers died from gunshot wounds before the fire consumed them. Koresh had orchestrated a mass murder-suicide using his apocalyptic prophecies to convince followers that dying was their pathway to eternal glory. 25 children died in the inferno, including Koresh's own offspring from his spiritual marriages. The man who claimed to speak for God had murdered an entire community, proving that prophetic authority in the wrong hands becomes a weapon of mass destruction. Case 4. Warren Jeffs. August 28, 2006. FBI agents surround a red Cadillac Escalade on Interstate 15 near Las Vegas, arresting the man inside who had been on their most wanted list for months. Warren Steed Jeffs, self-proclaimed prophet of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had used end-times prophecies to justify the systematic sexual abuse of children for decades. When Jeff's father, Rulon, died in 2002, Warren moved quickly to consolidate power over the 10,000-member FLDS community. Unlike his father's relatively moderate approach, Warren claimed direct revelation from God about the approaching apocalypse, using these prophecies to justify increasingly extreme control over his followers' lives. Jeff's revelations always seemed to benefit his personal desires. God allegedly told him that he alone could perform marriages, that young girls needed to marry older men to ensure their salvation, and that the end times required perfect obedience to the prophet's commands. Questioning Jeffs meant questioning God himself. Under the guise of divine revelation, Jeffs arranged marriages between grown men and girls as young as 12. He personally married 78 women, including his father's widows and numerous underage girls. These weren't marriages. They were systematic sexual trafficking disguised as religious ceremony. Jeff's most twisted prophecy involved reassigning families. If men displeased him, God would supposedly reveal that their wives and children belonged to someone else. Hundreds of families were torn apart overnight, with children forced to call strangers father, while their biological fathers were banished from the community. As law enforcement pressure mounted, Jeffs became increasingly paranoid, claiming God had revealed that government persecution of the FLDS proved the end times were near. He moved the community to remote compounds in Texas and other states, isolating followers from outside influence that might expose his crimes. In 2008, authorities raided Jeff's Yearning for Zion ranch in Texas, removing 439 children from what investigators found to be a systematic child abuse operation. Evidence included recorded phone calls of Jeffs instructing followers to train young girls for sexual submission to older men. Jeff's trial revealed the horrific reality behind his divine revelations. Prosecutors played recordings of Jeff sexually assaulting a 12-year-old spiritual wife, while other wives were forced to witness and participate. His prophecies were exposed as the calculated lies of a sexual predator. In 2011, Jeffs received life plus 20 years in prison for child sexual assault. Even from his cell, he continues issuing prophecies to remaining followers, proving that some people will cling to false prophets even after their lies are completely exposed in court. Hundreds of his victims continue struggling with the psychological damage of his prophetic abuse. Children raised believing their sexual exploitation was God's will face lifelong trauma, while families remain fractured by his divine reassignments that destroyed their bonds forever. Case 5. Jim Jones. November 18, 1978. The jungle settlement of Jonestown, Guyana becomes humanity's largest murder-suicide crime scene when 918 people die from cyanide-laced flavor aid in less than an hour. Among the dead are 304 children who had no choice in their prophet's final revolutionary act. Jim Jones didn't start as a doomsday prophet. In the 1950s and 60s, his People's Temple was genuinely progressive, operating integrated nursing homes and soup kitchens when most of America remained segregated. Jones seemed like a social justice warrior using religion to fight poverty and racism. But as the civil rights movement progressed and scrutiny increased, Jones's message darkened. He began preaching about an impending nuclear holocaust that would destroy capitalist America. Only his faithful followers would survive by fleeing to a socialist paradise he would create in South America. Jones convinced nearly 1,000 followers to abandon everything and move to his promised land in Guyana's remote jungle. What they found was a primitive agricultural commune surrounded by armed guards, where escape attempts were brutally punished and outside contact was forbidden. Isolated in the jungle, Jones' mental state deteriorated rapidly. He claimed the CIA was planning to destroy Jonestown, that defectors were plotting against him, and that American military forces would soon attack. His drug addiction and paranoid delusions fed his increasingly apocalyptic sermons. Jones regularly conducted white night drills where followers were forced to drink what they believed was poison, only to be told afterward it was a loyalty test. These rehearsals psychologically conditioned his people to accept mass suicide as an act of revolutionary defiance rather than murder. Jones taught that revolutionary suicide wasn't death, but ascension to another plane of existence where they would be free from capitalist oppression. He convinced followers that killing themselves and their children was the ultimate act of resistance against an evil government. When Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown to investigate abuse allegations, Jones saw his worst fears confirmed. The government had come to destroy his paradise. As Ryan prepared to leave with several defectors on November 18th, Jones knew his deception was about to be exposed worldwide. Jones ordered the murder to begin with the children, knowing parents would follow once their babies were dead. Armed guards forced mothers to squirt cyanide-laced liquid into their infants' mouths, while Jones preached about the beauty of their translation over the camp's loudspeakers. The entire massacre was recorded on Jones' orders. His voice can be heard encouraging followers as children scream and die around him. Die with a degree of dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. The tape reveals a man orchestrating mass murder while calling it liberation. While 918 followers died agonizing deaths from cyanide poisoning, Jim Jones took the coward's way out, a single gunshot to the head. The man who preached revolutionary courage chose the quickest death while watching his followers suffer the slow torture he had prescribed for them. The few survivors who escaped into the jungle faced lifelong trauma from watching their families die on their prophet's orders. Jones had proven that apocalyptic prophecy combined with isolation creates the perfect conditions for mass murder disguised as religious devotion. Case 6. Pat Robertson. January 1982. Pat Robertson stares directly into television cameras broadcasting to millions of Christian households across America and makes the most public prophetic declaration in religious broadcasting history. I guarantee you by the end of 1982, there is going to be a judgment on the world. The world doesn't end, but Robertson's credibility does. Unlike the isolated cult leaders before him, Marion Gordon Paige Robertson wielded mainstream influence through his Christian broadcasting network empire. The son of a U.S. senator, Robertson had built CBN into a media powerhouse, reaching 180 countries, making him America's most trusted evangelical voice. Robertson's 1982 doomsday prediction wasn't whispered to a small cult, it was broadcast to millions of 700 Club viewers who trusted his theological expertise. Using numerical analysis of biblical prophecy, Robertson declared with absolute certainty that God had revealed the world's end within months. Unlike previous false prophets who operated in relative obscurity, Robertson's failed prediction played out on television screens nationwide. Elderly viewers liquidated retirement accounts, young families abandoned long-term financial planning, churches split between believers who trusted Robertson and skeptics who questioned his prophetic authority. Rather than learning from his 1982 humiliation, Robertson continued making specific predictions. In 2007, he claimed God had revealed that a devastating tsunami would strike America's coastline, potentially killing millions. When this prediction also failed spectacularly, his credibility faced another devastating blow. Robertson's very public failures damaged the entire charismatic movement's credibility. If America's most prominent charismatic leader couldn't accurately hear from God about future events, what did that say about the movement's claims of divine revelation and prophetic gifts? Robertson's failed predictions became ammunition for secular critics, who used his false prophecies to mock evangelical Christianity for decades. Late-night comedians, newspaper columnists, and academic critics referenced his 1982 prediction whenever questioning religious authority or prophetic claims. While CBN survived Robertson's prophetic failures, major donors began questioning whether their contributions supported genuine ministry or a false prophet's media empire. Some longtime supporters abandoned the network entirely, viewing Robertson's failed predictions as evidence of spiritual deception. Robertson attempted to reinterpret his failed predictions, claiming they referred to spiritual judgments or longer timelines than originally stated. These weak explanations only highlighted his original certainty and made his prophetic claims seem even more fraudulent to critics. Robertson's mainstream platform proved that false prophecy wasn't limited to isolated cults. It could flourish in respected religious institutions with massive media reach. His failures became a template that modern televangelists would follow, making bold predictions to attract attention while quietly abandoning them when reality intervened. Though Robertson continued broadcasting until his death in 2023, his prophetic credibility never recovered from his 1982 failure. His case proved that public false prophecy creates permanent skepticism that no amount of theological explanation can overcome. Case 7. Sun Myung Moon, July 1, 1982. Madison Square Garden becomes the venue for history's largest wedding ceremony when 2,075 couples simultaneously exchanged vows in identical white dresses and black suits. Their marriages weren't arranged by love or choice, but by the Korean man standing at center stage, who claimed to be humanity's messiah. Sun Myung Moon's prophetic claims began in war-torn Korea, where he declared that Jesus Christ had appeared to him personally in 1936, commanding the 16-year-old to complete Christianity's unfinished mission. Moon's divine principle taught that he was the true parent, destined to create sinless families and prevent God's final judgment on humanity. Moon's central prophecy was both grandiose and personally profitable. Only couples blessed by him could produce children free from original sin. These mass blessing ceremonies weren't just weddings, they were humanity's salvation from eternal damnation. With Moon personally selecting spouses for thousands of followers, Moon's marriage arrangements destroyed normal human courtship and romantic love. Followers submitted photographs and personal information, trusting Moon's divine insight to choose their eternal companions. Many couples met for the first time at their wedding ceremony, believing Moon's prophetic authority superseded their personal preferences. Moon's prophecies conveniently required massive financial contributions from followers desperate to secure their salvation. Members worked 18-hour days selling flowers and candy on street corners, donating every penny to fund Moon's lavish lifestyle while living in poverty themselves, believing their sacrifice would prevent apocalyptic judgment. The Unification Church recruited intensely lonely young people through love bombing, overwhelming attention and affection that made targets feel special and chosen. Once isolated from family and friends, recruits became psychologically dependent on Moon's approval and terrified of losing their prophetic salvation. Moon used his followers' donations to purchase newspapers, universities, and political organizations worldwide, claiming God had revealed that controlling media and politics was essential for preventing humanity's destruction. His Washington Times newspaper became a significant conservative voice in American politics. In 1984, Moon was convicted of tax fraud and conspiracy for hiding $1.7 million in personal income. The man who claimed divine authority to arrange marriages couldn't honestly report his earthly finances, exposing his prophetic claims as elaborate fraud designed to enrich himself. Former Unification Church members reported severe psychological damage from Moon's arranged marriages. Couples, forced together by prophetic authority, often experienced loveless relationships, sexual dysfunction, and emotional abuse, while being taught that divorce would damn their souls eternally. Moon's own children struggled with addiction, mental illness, and rebellion against their father's prophetic authority. The man who claimed to create perfect families through divine marriage couldn't manage his own household, proving that his prophetic insights were worthless even for those closest to him. Even after Moon's death in 2012, his arranged marriage prophecies continue damaging lives. Thousands remain trapped in loveless relationships they believe are divinely ordained, too terrified of eternal judgment to seek the happiness Moon's false prophecies stole from them. Case 8. Marshall Applewhite. March 26, 1997. Police enter a $1.3 million mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, to discover 39 bodies arranged in bunk beds, each covered with identical purple shrouds. The victims had consumed lethal doses of phenobarbital mixed with applesauce, believing they were boarding a UFO hidden behind Comet Hale-Bopp. Marshall Herff Applewhite, Jr. seemed an unlikely prophet for the space age. A classically trained music teacher and opera singer, he had taught at the University of Alabama before his life collapsed due to personal scandals and psychological breakdown in the early 1970s. After meeting Bonnie Nettles in 1972, Applewhite became convinced they were the two witnesses mentioned in the Book of Revelation, extraterrestrial beings sent to Earth to guide humans to the next level of existence. When Nettles died of cancer in 1985, Applewhite claimed she had successfully graduated to the alien realm. Applewhite taught that Earth was about to be recycled, completely destroyed and renewed like a garden. The only escape was to abandon human containers, bodies, and board the spacecraft that would transport worthy souls to the next level of cosmic evolution. Heaven's Gate members were systematically stripped of human identity. They adopted androgynous appearances, wore identical clothing, and referred to their bodies as temporary vehicles. 8 male members, including Applewhite, underwent castration to eliminate sexual desires that supposedly prevented spiritual evolution. Unlike previous cult leaders, Applewhite used the emerging internet to spread his message globally. Heaven's Gate's website attracted isolated individuals seeking spiritual meaning, offering them cosmic purpose through Applewhite's science fiction prophecies about alien salvation. When Comet Hale-Bopp became visible in 1996, Applewhite declared it was the prophetic sign his followers had been awaiting. He claimed a UFO was following the comet, hidden from telescopes but visible to spiritually evolved beings ready to abandon their earthly existence. Applewhite meticulously planned the group's suicide as a graduation ceremony, Members recorded farewell videos explaining their joy at leaving Earth behind. They consumed their final meal at a restaurant, returned home, and began taking shifts consuming the lethal drug cocktail. Surveillance footage shows members calmly preparing for death, helping each other consume the poison before lying down with plastic bags over their heads to ensure suffocation. They died believing they were about to board an alien spacecraft for eternal cosmic adventure. The farewell videos left by Heaven's Gate members reveal the complete psychological control Applewhite exercised. Intelligent, educated people speak enthusiastically about abandoning their families and lives, convinced that mass suicide represents spiritual evolution rather than tragic manipulation. The Heaven's Gate suicides shocked the world and prompted serious examination of internet recruitment by dangerous cults. Families who had lost loved ones to Applewhite's prophecies struggled to understand how educated adults could be convinced to commit suicide for an imaginary spaceship. No UFO appeared, no cosmic graduation occurred. Applewhite's prophecies were revealed as the delusional fantasies of a mentally ill man who used science fiction spirituality to convince vulnerable people that suicide was salvation. Case 9. Ronald Wineland. June 6, 2012. Federal Judge Danny Reeves sentences Ronald Wineland to 3.5 years in prison for tax fraud, officially marking the end of the self-proclaimed prophet's credibility. The man who had guaranteed World War III would begin in 2008 was finally exposed as a common criminal who used prophecy to steal from his followers. Ronald Wineland appeared to be a respectable minister in the Church of God tradition, serving congregations for decades before his prophetic delusions took control. His transformation from humble pastor to end-times prophet began when he claimed God had revealed exclusive knowledge about the timeline of Christ's return. In 2006, Wineland published his prophetic manifesto, boldly declaring himself one of the 2 witnesses mentioned in Revelation. His book guaranteed that World War III would begin in late 2008, followed by Jesus Christ's return by 2012. He staked his entire ministry on these specific dates. When followers questioned his authority, Wineland escalated his claims dramatically. He declared that he and his wife Laura were the 2 witnesses prophesied to appear before Christ's return, possessing supernatural power to call down plagues and execute divine judgment on unbelievers. Wineland's prophecies generated massive donations from followers desperate to support God's final warning to humanity. Members liquidated retirement accounts and mortgaged homes to fund his urgent end-times ministry, believing their financial sacrifice would ensure their survival during the coming tribulation. As 2008 passed without the prophesied World War III, Wineland desperately revised his predictions. He claimed the war had begun spiritually and would manifest physically later. When followers demanded explanations, he accused them of lacking faith in God's timeline. When Jesus failed to return by 2012, Wineland's remaining credibility evaporated completely. His mathematical certainty proved worthless, leaving devastated followers who had reorganized their entire lives around his false timeline. Many faced financial ruin after years of excessive donations. While Wineland preached about God's coming judgment on sinful humanity, he was secretly evading taxes on hundreds of thousands of dollars in unreported income. The IRS discovered he had used church funds for personal luxuries while his followers sacrificed financially for his prophetic mission. Federal prosecutors charged Wineland with 5 counts of tax evasion, revealing that he had hidden $357,065 in income between 2004 and 2007. The man who claimed divine revelation about future events couldn't honestly report his past financial transactions. During Wineland's trial, former followers testified about the financial and emotional devastation his false prophecies had caused. Families had been torn apart, life savings lost, and faith destroyed by trusting a man who claimed to speak for God while stealing from them. Judge Reeves sentenced Wineland to federal prison, stating that his position of religious trust made his crimes particularly egregious. The prophet who had predicted divine judgment on others finally faced human justice for his own criminal behavior. Even from prison, Wineland continued issuing prophecies to his remaining handful of followers, proving that some false prophets never abandon their delusions even when reality completely destroys their credibility. His criminal conviction stands as permanent evidence that his prophetic claims were fraudulent. Case 10. Yaya Vila. July 25, 1992. The Barcelona Olympics begin with spectacular opening ceremonies broadcast to billions worldwide. In Puerto Rico, beloved evangelist Yaya Avila watches in stunned silence as his most public prophetic prediction collapses in real time. He had guaranteed these games would never occur because Jesus Christ would return first. José Joaquín Yaya Avila wasn't a typical false prophet. For decades, he had been Puerto Rico's most trusted evangelical voice, conducting massive healing crusades across Latin America and establishing genuine charitable ministries that helped thousands of impoverished families escape poverty through education and faith. Unlike the cult leaders and criminal prophets before him, Avila had built his reputation through consistent charitable work and biblical preaching. His television ministry reached millions across Spanish-speaking America, making him one of the most influential evangelical voices in the region. During a widely broadcast television program, Avila made his most specific prophetic declaration. The 1992 Barcelona Olympics would never take place because the rapture would occur beforehand, removing all true Christians from earth before the games began. He staked his prophetic credibility on this very public timeline. Avila's prediction reflected the charismatic movement's emphasis on modern prophetic gifts. Followers expected their leaders to receive direct revelations from God about future events, making Avila's Olympic prophecy seem like natural spiritual insight rather than dangerous date-setting. Across Puerto Rico and Latin America, Avila's followers prepared for the rapture that would precede the canceled Olympics. Some abandoned vacation plans, believing they would be in heaven before summer ended. Others used the prophecy to evangelize neighbors, warning them about the approaching end. As the Barcelona Olympics opened with magnificent pageantry, Avila's prophecy was exposed as completely false before a global audience of billions. Unlike previous false prophets whose failures occurred in relative obscurity, Avila's mistake was broadcast worldwide in real time. The very public failure damaged Avila's prophetic authority significantly. Though his charitable work and decades of faithful ministry prevented complete rejection by his followers. Critics within the charismatic movement used his failure as evidence against specific date-setting by modern prophets. To his credit, Avila publicly acknowledged his prophetic error and warned other ministers against setting specific dates for Christ's return. His humble response demonstrated integrity that distinguished him from false prophets who desperately revised their predictions when reality intervened. Avila's Olympic prophecy became a cautionary tale within charismatic Christianity about the dangers of specific prophetic predictions, even by otherwise faithful ministers. His case proved that prophetic error could damage even the most respected religious leaders. Though his prophetic credibility was permanently damaged, Avila continued his charitable ministry until his death in 2013. Focusing on practical service rather than prophetic predictions. His failed Olympic prophecy served as a permanent reminder that even beloved religious leaders can make devastating prophetic errors. Avila's very public prophetic failure became required teaching in many charismatic Bible schools about the dangers of specific date setting, proving that failed prophecy creates lasting skepticism, even when delivered by genuinely faithful ministers. 10 false prophets, countless ruined lives. From William Miller's Great Disappointment in 1844 to Harold Camping's rapture fraud in 2011, these stories reveal a disturbing pattern that spans nearly 2 centuries of religious manipulation and prophetic abuse. The psychological tactics remain identical across time and culture. Every false prophet begins by establishing unquestionable authority through claimed divine revelation. They create urgency through specific dates and apocalyptic scenarios. They demand total surrender, financial, emotional, and spiritual, from followers desperate for meaning and security in an uncertain world. These prophets didn't target the stupid or gullible. They manipulated the spiritually hungry, the emotionally wounded, and the intellectually curious. Have you encountered similar manipulation in religious settings? Maybe a pastor who claimed a special revelation about your life, a ministry that demanded excessive financial commitments for spiritual breakthrough, or a leader who discouraged questions about their authority by claiming you were resisting God's voice? What warning signs do you think churches and families should watch for to protect vulnerable members from prophetic manipulation? How can religious communities maintain healthy skepticism without abandoning faith entirely? Have you witnessed the aftermath when prophetic predictions fail? How do communities recover when their spiritual authority figures are exposed as frauds or criminals? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding these manipulation tactics. Finally, subscribe to Savage Case Files for more true crime documentaries like this one.